Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and I'm so glad to see you once again with lecture 28 of drama 2, that is modern drama. Well, in today's talk we are going to do our discussion based on Pygmalion's Yenner, its tone, writing style, title, beginning and ending, and we will try to cover up some of the characters as well. As far as Pygmalion's Yenner and tone is concerned, the drama is basically depicting one of the major themes of the modern drama, that is realism. Shaw has a lot to say here, heavy stuff about language, society and the soul. Lucky for us in this case, he likes to show, not tell. Well, for the most part. He usually liked writing long introductions to his plays. We get long speeches from Higgins about how language is, what makes us human, about the great significance of his work with Eliza, and sometimes it seems like Shaw is simply using him as a mouthpiece. But we get enough perspectives on other issues as well. Alfred Doolittle on the undeserving poor, Mrs. Higgins on the place of women in society, and enough heated arguments to raise doubts about the truth of Higgins' statements. Until we get to the fourth act, the play seems like it's headed towards the usual sort of the Hollywood ending, a happy ending, a kind of perfect traditional combination of things, typical plot structure. Eliza is going to be transformed into an intelligent, elegant, eloquent, beautiful and eligible young woman. Grumpy old Higgins is going to learn a lesson or two about manners and compassion. Somebody will get married, blah 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 blah. Not so fast, says Shaw. Instead we get two more acts full of arguing, full of conflicts, passive and aggressive behaviors with no real end in sight. We do get a marriage in the end, but it's not your neat little fairy tale kind of thing. Doolittle's not really much for sticking with a single woman. He wouldn't even be thinking about it if it weren't for that whole middle class morality thing. Well, in the end, Higgins seems to be the only one who is sure how things will turn out. Eliza will come back that he has a strong belief in. He tells his mother, but we have no real way of knowing if she will. As it turns out, the play's central question isn't, can you pass off a flower girl as a duchess? But what can you do with her once you do? This seems to be the very basic question that is echoing all the time in the play and in the script. As attractive and perhaps truthful as Higgins' talk about the soul and language is, Shaw forces us to put into the test. The great secret, Higgins tells Eliza, is not having good manners or bad manners, but having the same manners for all human souls. This is the sermon of equality that Shaw teaches. Well, we have to wonder, though, can this apply to the real world, or is this nothing more than a fantasy? That is the very first discussion question that I opens up for you. And this discussion question is entirely based on the theme of realism. Well, if we talk about the tone of the play, it is didactic, it is witty. As we have said more than once, Shaw wants to get us thinking about a lot of important stuff. Now, what this important stuff is, luckily, he's not into lecturing, he's into showing, he's into proving, he's into illustrating. Think of him as a zany, lovable teacher, enthusiastic, passionate, full of energy. He wants you to learn something and have fun doing it. On second thought, that sounds a little like your friends here at Shampoo. The play scenario seems so simple. Poor girl becomes Duchess thanks to brilliant, eccentric teacher, that by the time Shaw starts asking the big issues, we're so invested in the characters that resistance is futile. The whole thing is a bit like Higgins himself. Sometimes Pygmalion can be hard to deal with, but in the end it is so charming that you can't help but like it. And that is what I often tell my student, especially when they are watching the movie. In the beginning they find it quite boring and you know, they get tired of understanding, but slowly and gradually when they are moving with the movie, when they're watching it and they keep watching and reach the climax, it gets very difficult to push them back and make them wait for the next day to finish the next part the next day, and they would want to watch the entire of the play in one day. So, if you talk about Pygmalion's writing style, it's quite a straightforward and very witty, in fact. Though Henry Higgins claims to be a regular John Milton, Shaw doesn't let him get too poetic. He has too many important topics to tackle with, and he can't be bothered with heavy symbolism, complicated metaphors and big words. So you would have noticed that language used in Pygmalion is quite straightforward, simple and comprehensible. Above all, Shaw wants his characters to speak, whether with Eliza's almost incomprehensible accent, Doolittle's strange charm, or Higgins' cynical reason. He wants us to understand the variety of ways English can be spoken. And so we get Higgins imitating Eliza. "Cheer up, Captain," and "Hi, you flower of a poor girl," and what Higgins calls Doolittle's native wood notes wild. Each is distinct on a grammatical level, and when performed is delivered with a different accent. Okay, now we need to have some word about what's up with the ending. You remember I referred to it in the very beginning, or probably in the end of the last talk, that what's up with the ending is kind of a debatable thing. What happens in the end? And the most of it you will find in the sequel of the Pygmalion. However, I would like to give you some flavor of how can an ending be of this play. Okay, this one's tough. The play ends with big argument between Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle. We're not talking about a little quarrel here, but a heck of a fight. Eliza's already made Higgins plenty angry by leaving his house and then throwing slippers onto his face, and then proceeding to act all cheery and nice the next day at Higgins' mother's place. She's already given Pickering most of the credit for her transformation from flower girl to lady, and now, to top it all off, she's refusing to come back and live with Higgins. You see, Eliza doesn't know what to do with herself now, and her biggest confusion is that what is she good for now? That she's got an upper class accent but no money and no place to go. So what is she going to do with all her made up self, all dressed up with good accent but nothing to go? She has no place to belong to. Higgins doesn't seem too fazed by this. He tells her that you shouldn't worry much about it. He doesn't mean to treat her poorly. He treats everyone poorly, and that's what he says, that it's not about good manners and bad manners, rather it's about keeping the same manners for everybody. It's just his way of being fair. Now, it's easy to be cynical and write Higgins off as a jerk. He does call Eliza a liar, a fool, an idiot, a silly girl, and most of all, a damaged, impudent slut, squashed cabbage, so on and so forth. Oh, and he almost strangles her too. But it's hard not to buy into what he's saying, at least a little bit, since he has such a beautiful way of putting things up. Eliza herself doesn't buy a lot of what he is saying. She doesn't seem convinced by the whole "I treat everyone like garbage" excuse. She's insulted by Higgins' offer to arrange a marriage with somebody rich. She's so annoyed by the whole thing that she starts making threats of her own. She tells Higgins that she'll marry Freddy if she has to. Higgins doesn't want his masterpiece wasted on such a lout. She even threatens to use her knowledge against him and to teach one of Higgins' competitors the methods she learned too. And here she's referring to the linguist who already knew 32 languages. And this really tricks him off to go into business for herself. So, strangulation nearly ensues before Higgins takes a great realization. By finally learning to treat him poorly, Higgins believes that Eliza has finally become his equal. Again, this all seems a bit off, and Eliza herself isn't convinced. And why should she be? Hasn't Higgins been having these little realizations the whole time? Well, recall his reaction to her arrival at Wimpole Street. "Oh, not this one again." Throw her out. "No, wait, she'll be a wonderful little guinea pig." "Let's have some fun, Pickering." She has plenty of reasons not to trust him. Would you listen to someone talk like that if he or she had just tried to wring your neck? Well, we know we wouldn't. She got all these memories swirling around in her head now, and that is causing her a lot of confusion. So, what happens that Eliza turns around to leave, telling Higgins, "I shall not see you again. Goodbye." Higgins isn't one to give up, however. He calls after her and tells her to pick up some groceries and fresh clothes. Higgins' mother, who's just come in to get Eliza, thinks he's crazy. But Higgins himself is sure she'll buy him all right enough. He tells his mother goodbye. So, now it seems like everything's up in the air at this point, right? And Higgins is sure Eliza will come back, but, well, he has been wrong before, so he can be wrong again. Eliza seems to doubt the sincerity of Higgins' arguments, but on the other hand, he can be pretty persuasive as he is. She herself has threatened to do a lot of things, like marry Freddy, but come on, Freddy is a pretty big deuce. So it's kind of a cliffhanger. Eliza is still left in a difficult position. She can't go back to selling flowers, but she doesn't want to sell herself to marry into money, this, and that, and that. And Higgins won't meet her halfway. At least not yet. Is there romance hiding somewhere? And if not, why not? That is the second question I throw and open up for your debate, your understanding, your interpretation. Do you find any romance in the play? Apart Freddy and Eliza, we understand that's not a romance. Do you find any romance going on between the protagonist and antagonist? If yes, how? If no, why not? Not according to Shaw. He wrote a sequel to Pygmalion, and like most sequels, it's not nearly as good as the original. It's just a really long explanation of what happens. It need not be shown in action, he says. Shaw just wants us to know that everybody reading the play is silly and sentimental, and no, Higgins and Eliza aren't reunited. Instead, she marries Freddy and then open a flower shop, and they pretty much live happily ever after. We here at this discussing forum say forget about the sequel and go with your gut. You can do better than that. So I would want you to write your own ending, and this may be thrown as a question in your assessment somewhere to define your own ending of the play Pygmalion, and we will see how are you going to be just with the beautiful structure of the plot. So these were the tits and bits about the Pygmalion. We discussed several aspects of the play, and this brings us towards the end of the discussion, where we have to finally sketch and draw the characters to see what kind of personalities were they in the beginning of the play, and what kind of developments took place during the play, and what they become in the end. So let's have character sketching session based on some of the major characters in the play. So we are going to start with Professor Henry Higgins. Higgins is what you might call a bundle of contradictions. You must have seen that. He's a woman-hating mama's boy, and incredibly talented, educated, weeny little baby of a man, a personable, in fact, misanthrope, a lovable jerk. Shaw says it best in his initial description of Higgins. He says, his manner varies from genial bullying when he's in good humor to stormy petulance when anything goes wrong. But he is so entirely frank and void of malice that he remains likable even in his least reasonable moments. So Shaw describes him all best in his words, in his own words. The first time we meet Higgins, he's acting as a combination street magician or a peacemaker. If you remember in the convent garden, he calms down Eliza, then proceeds to show off his skills by telling people where they are from just by listening to the sound of their voice. Oh, and he can mimic them too. Right from the beginning we can tell he's a bit of a braggart and a bit of a preacher. He can't help but tell Pickering all about his trade, his life philosophy, and his ability to turn flower girls into duchesses. But as far as first impressions go, he makes a pretty good one. Don't you agree? He comes off as one heck of a cool cat. By the end of the second act, things have become more complicated. The things turns out he treats women like trash, sometimes garbage, and his motives for taking on Pickering's bet seems less than sincere. That's how it looks like in the beginning. He begins bossing Eliza around rather quickly, telling her what to do, what not to do, what to wear, what not to wear, what to eat, what not to eat, when not to eat, manipulating her with big promises of chocolates, roaming around in cab, so on and so forth. He's quite suave, you have to give him that. He even pays Eliza's father so that he can take her into custody. He gave him £5 and he says that he paid for the girl. All of this happens before he calls her an idiot, and he does not use very good words for her, and almost assaults her twice. Well, Higgins' actions spring from some unexplained distaste for young women, who he tells his mother are all idiots. Oh, and he has this weird thing for women that remind him of his mom, At various points in the play, he compares women to blocks of woods, calls Eliza garbage, asks to have her wrapped in brown paper like a package, and refers to her as his masterpiece. That is kind of very, a rich thing to indulge into discussion to understand Higgins' character and specifically his attitude towards women. Both his mother and his maid, Mrs. Pierce, point out how unfair this all is, how in Mrs. Pierce's words, you can't take a girl up like that as if you were picking up a pebble on the beach. And this exactly, I would say, translate Higgins' actions of taking on to Eliza. Though he can be a pig-headed jerk, stubborn fellow, Higgins is definitely not a fool. He knows he's a jerk, and he's even come up with a justification for his behavior. After Eliza accuses him of treating her unfairly, he tells her, "The great secret, Eliza, is not having bad manners or good manners or any other particular sort of manners, but having the same manners for all human souls. In short, behaving as if you were in heaven where there are no third-class carriages and one soul is as good as another." If we discuss about these words, if we discuss about these thoughts, we don't find Higgins as bad as he appears to be. This is the best example of Higgins' high-minded philosophical side. Sounds pretty convincing and agreeable. Thing is, sometimes it's hard to tell if he's really being sincere with the girl and with his motives of transforming the poor girl into Duchess, or if he's trying to get out of a tough spot. He does, however, he have a piquant for talking about the soul of man, about the importance of language and social equality. Given Shaw's socialist learning, he was a member of the British socialist group, the Fabian Society, and wrote on and debated various social issues. It's hard to dismiss everything Higgins says as meaningless claptrap. So Higgins' fervor can get him into trouble. However, he spends so much time inventing new Elizas with Pickering that he seems to sometimes forget that she's a human being, and that is his mistake basically, or can be considered one. He forgets to congratulate her for her bet-winning performance, and he gets so angry he nearly hurts her, and he ultimately puts her into a very tricky position. So taking all this into consideration, it's hard to pass judgment on Higgins. It's very hard to be judgmental about his character. He's always likable, that is very sure. He's the play's voice of reason, wisdom and intelligence and skill, the preacher and poet, but he's also a solemnly absent-minded troublemaker. He's the engine that drives the play. He's not Mr. Perfect, but he has heart, and he has mind as well. He's the closest thing we get to Shaw. But don't make the mistake of substituting one for the other. Higgins is like Shaw in some ways, but he's not Shaw. He's Pygmalion, the character, and it's safe to say that he's also Pygmalion the play. Without him, it simply couldn't be. And that was all Higgins' character. And the second character we are going to discuss is Eliza's character, the protagonist of the story. Eliza comes very close to being a walking cliché. She's the poor girl from the streets who turns out to be a brilliant and beautiful young woman. She's smart, she's intelligent, she's passionate, she's independent and feisty. This sounds like a recipe of a cookie cutter, inspirational heroine. But Man, does Eliza have charm? For one thing, you can't hate a girl who howls every time she gets angry. And boy, does she howl. We are talking how. It should be said that a lot of the time Eliza functions as comic relief when she is making such sounds. Her howls, her indignation, her frequent exclamation of "Garn!" and "I'm a good girl, I am!" and most notably her performance at Mrs. Higgins' party are all designed to make us laugh. It's all comic relief. Throughout it all, however, we know that she's trying her hardest to achieve her goals. We very much feel for her when we realize that Higgins and Pickering are getting a little carried away with their experiments. By the time we get to Act 4, we are blaming both of these characters and we are taking Eliza's side, and when Higgins ignores her, man, this gets really aggressive, and we get angry, aren't we? By then she's gotten over all the things that made us laugh, and we are kind of in love with her character. She doesn't speak with a thick accent anymore. Her grammar is correct. She moves with poise and confidence, and she's definitely a beautiful, charming woman who has now all the manners, and she can follow all the traditions of sophistication. Well, we don't usually condone throwing slippers or shoes of any kind, but we understand when Eliza throws a pair at Higgins, over the course of the play, Eliza is transformed from a poor girl into a sophisticated young woman. But perhaps more importantly, she stops being the butt of jokes and becomes a real three-dimensional character, someone for whom we can really, really feel. So towards the end of the play, we find out that she's not 100% confident. She starts again with the darn howling, and that she's not all sweetness and light. She shows Higgins that she's proud and she's shrewd, and tells him that she had rather go into competition with him than be married off to some rich guy. Like Higgins says, she is his equal, but she doesn't want to go his way or live his life. So on a thematic level, if we see, Eliza serves to show us how messed up society is. Her transformation is a testament to the power of education and language. And her difficulties demonstrate how little the system appreciates her kind of intelligence. She is an inspiration and a warning too, and she's anything but a cliche. Now, I would like to give you some, although you had this watch and this very much made you understand what do I mean by Cockney accent, or what it is meant by Cockney accent, but here I would like to tell you about a few bits of her thick accent that will make you understand the thing even better. So it's the trick, a nasal tone quality. It's a standard American, I would say, way of producing sounds. As in little, 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 okay, and it becomes a glottal stop, lil, lil. So though it has to be little, little with a very little slight touch on ter sound, but when it becomes Cockney, it will become little bit. So little bit, and little bit, little bit. You quickly skip the ter sound altogether, and here it becomes thick accent, hard to understand but easy to produce. In standard American, it becomes it is stressed stressed E sound, as in B. This is stress E sound, B. right? However, when it goes into Cockney accent, it becomes air sound, as in paid, a. So B is not B, rather bay, right? So in standard American it will be B, and when Cockney it will be bay, right? You remember that take and something like of paid, I remember. Well, unstressed E as in silly and country. You see, in silly, although there is E sound, but this is unstressed. You do not take it very long, like silly. You don't call it silly, you call it silly. Very quick go on the E sound. And country, in the end you have this E sound. However, when it is a Cockney accent, it becomes I as in bit, stressed E, and little instead of little. Okay, now you have as ow sound in out, ow. It's ow sound in standard American. However, in Cockney it becomes a plus ow, something like this. It's very funny to make, in fact. So, in My Fair Lady, you will see that I am going to give you this task to try to transcribe this little passage from the My Fair Lady. If you open up, if you explore on the internet, you will get to see what are the way to transcribe English into its symbols. So, I ain't done nothing wrong by speaking to the gentleman. I've a right to sell flowers if I keep off the curb. I'm a respectable girl, so help me. I never spoke to him except to ask him to buy a flower of me. So, I want you to transcribe this into Cockney accent. What did you take down my words for? How do I know you took me down right? You just show me what you have wrote about me. What's that? That and proper writing. I can't read it. So here it becomes quite understandable because I am not speaking this in Cockney accent. However, when you listen to the same dialogues, and I showed you the same dialogues spoken by Eliza in the very first episode, in the very first scene, you will see that it's not at all easy to understand these dialogues. So let's start with our discussion about Mr. Alfred Doolittle, a very interesting character in the play. Alfred Doolittle is a smooth-talking garbage man, a serial monogamist, although he's not always really married, a drunk and a deadbeat father. He's got a lot to say about middle-class morality and complicated theories about the deserving and undeserving poor. You must have observed and I would say enjoyed his discussion with Mr. Higgins when he's there to get £5 in return, or either to get £5 or return his daughter. Although he never means to taking her daughter back. He has principles too, but they are not exactly conventional. He has no trouble making £5 from Higgins, but he doesn't want any more than that. What can be the reason behind it, if I ask you? He wants just enough money to have a few drinks and some fun. That's it. So in order to understand Doolittle, you have to understand how he speaks. This exchange is quite notable here. And I articulate these dialogues for you. Doolittle. Most musical, most melancholy. I tell you, Governor, if you'll only let me get a word in, I'm willing to tell you, I'm wanting to tell you, I'm waiting to tell you. Higgins, Pickering, this chap has a certain natural gift of rhetoric. Observe the rhythm of his native wood notes wild. I'm willing to tell you, I'm wanting to tell you, I'm waiting to tell you. Sentimental rhetoric. That's the Welsh strain in him. It also accounts for his mendacity and dishonesty. So, he is the sum of his mysterious speaking ability. You can describe what Doolittle's saying with all sorts of fancy Greek words, but it's enough to note how he repeats those Greek phrases that Higgins singles out, and how his speech is sort of sing-songs. Whether or not we believe what Doolittle's talking about doesn't matter. It sounds nice. It sounds real. It sounds about a layman in the street, a real garbage man. It's not a fantasy, it's not a story from a book. These skills get Doolittle into trouble, however. When Higgins nominates him for some such speaking position and he gets it, along with a generous income, he is in real trouble, because here he cannot beg money, he cannot enjoy money, he cannot drink, he cannot have fun the way he used to. So now he is attached with several responsibilities and he's obliged to fulfill them. He can't handle all the money. He doesn't want to be touched, asked to spare some change in the same way he touched Higgins. So Doolittle demonstrates how powerful and potentially dangerous words can be. Selection of words, use of words, and articulation of words. Lucky for us, his intentions are mostly honorable. He is the character most prone to lecturing. Yes, even more so than Higgins. And though his theories may not be entirely logical, his little sermon do raise some issues regarding class relations. Think of him this way. He's a stereotype of a drunken poor guy with an oratorical twist. And now some words about Colonel Pickering. I would want to draw a sketch of these characters for you, and I would want you to fill colors in it by substantiating it text from your play. So Colonel Pickering is in fact the most lovable character in the play after Eliza, and I would say, if not after Higgins, he's of the, I would say, equal significance somehow. Colonel Pickering is the closest thing Pygmalion has to a father figure. He is a genial old chap, an expert in Sanskrit, and an all-round nice guy with traditional mannerism and behavior. He and Higgins hit it off right away, and without his suggestion, the whole bet would have never happened. I would say not only suggestion, his support, his wisdom, and his I would say, voice suggestions. Eliza credits Pickering's gentlemanly ways for starting her transformation from flower girl to duchess. In fact, she calls him the one who made her learn how to respect herself, for truly making her feel like a lady. Pickering really is the epitome of the sidekick in the play, in the Pygmalion. He serves a counterpoint for Higgins, someone Higgins can bounce remarks off. His presence also allows for the humorous, effusive bit of Eliza's worship at the end of Act 3. Ultimately, Pickering adds a little more spirit and little more kindness into the mix of emotions in the play. Mrs. Higgins' character is a very important character because she represents sophisticated women in the society. Mrs. Higgins, Henry's mother, was once a young, intelligent, independent woman with progressive ideas. When we met her, she is older, but she's no less intelligent, independent or progressive, well, maybe a little less progressive though. In many ways, she is a traditional mother figure. She doesn't take any of her son's nonsense, and she does ask him why he hasn't married. At the same time, she knows a thing or two about being a woman in turn-of-the-century London, and she fears for Eliza's fate, as she can foresee what Higgins being man cannot. After watching Eliza's transformation and performance at her little party, Mrs. Higgins tells it like it is to her son. "Eliza is certainly a fine example of your art," she says, "but you are just going to leave her in an awkward position. Eliza won't be able to support herself with the kind of skills you are giving her." And this is her wisdom that she speaks of here. Mrs. Higgins' primary function is to raise these big issues, big questions, that can be questions raised into any intelligent mind, and to warn Higgins of the eventual, unavoidable, comparatively unpleasant consequences of his actions. By giving her a sharp wit and a bit of a motherly stirk, Shaw makes Mrs. Higgins more than simply a talking head. There's a reason why Eliza runs off to Mrs. Higgins, place where she's had enough of Higgins. She's just the kind of cool, ordered lady you want to turn to when you need some good advice. About Mrs. Pierce. Mrs. Pierce is a housekeeper. She's as intelligent as a woman can be. She's also, like Pickering and Mrs. Higgins, a voice of reason, wisdom, kindness, and manners. Heck, if Pickering is the play's father figure, then Mrs. Pierce is its mother figure, which makes Mrs. Higgins the alternative mother figure, we guess. Mrs. Pierce watches out for Eliza from the very beginning. Like Mrs. Higgins, she used to dealing with Henry Higgins, and she knows he can get carried away with his little projects. After she shows Eliza to the bathroom, she tells Higgins in no uncertain terms, "This scheme is ridiculous." She wants to make sure Eliza doesn't get hurt, and we see that how clear she is in mind as far as a girl is concerned, without letting her conscience disturbed by the class difference. Now you may be wondering why Shaw has all these so-called voices of reasons. Isn't one enough? Well, no. Think of it this way. Pickering represents the fatherly, gentlemanly voice. Mrs. Higgins represents the once hip young woman voice. Mrs. Pierce represents the traditional motherly, lower class, we are talking socio-economical class here, voice. She has another perspective on the problems of being a woman, one more closely related to Eliza's original situation in life, and it comes as no surprise that she wants to protect the girl. So now Mrs. and Miss Ansford Hill, Freddy's sister and Freddy's mother. We can cover these two women at the same time because these are not big characters, rather these are very trivial appearances in the play, and they're always together after all. You can read more about Clara in the character roles section given in the end of the play, and they really just represent two stages of what Shaw calls genteel poverty. And you would remember in the beginning, in the first scene, when Mrs. Ansford Hill comes close to somewhere Mr. Higgins and ask him if he can help him, if he can help her grab a cab, and he said that, "Why don't you take a bus and she would drop you at this place because here that you live," and she finds herself very offended. They are a mother-daughter team of reasonably wealthy ladies. They start the plot going when they ask Eliza if and how she knows Freddy. They represent everything that Eliza is not. They are clean, well-dressed, and well-spoken. In the third act, we find out via Mrs. Ansford Hill that the family isn't doing so well. and that Clara really doesn't get it. They are on the decline while Eliza's on her way up, and they're all headed for the same uncomfortable middle grounds. And now a word about Freddy, one important character, I would say. Freddy is a romantic interest in the play. In another play, he might have a big part. In this play, he barely has a part at all. There's not much romance to be found practically. Freddy is not exactly a heartthrob, though. When we first meet him, he's running around looking for a cab, which he never finds. In Act 3, he mistakes Eliza's normal Cockney accent, the stuff about influenza and doing in, for small talk. He thinks she is the bee's knees and quickly falls in love with her. He wants to walk through the park with Eliza, but she'll have no such thing because she's not girl of fantasies. Still, he leaves the party and the play in high spirits. If anything, Freddy shows us how unconventional Pygmalion really is. There's not much room for your standard love affair in there, not with all the heavy stuff. He is another bit of comic relief at times, and as we see in the last act, blackmail material for Eliza, if nothing else. And this session, this talk session regarding character sketches ends with the session that we are going to start is on discussion questions based on Pygmalion, which should attract a lot of attention, which should seek your attention because they are going to be part of discussions in your classrooms, and there may be questions to be asked in your assessments as well. So I am going to throw many questions for your consideration, and now when we have reached the end of the play, I would want you to, because this play has taken more time than any other play, and I think with the help of this watch, you would have been quite able to understand each bit of it. And it's going to be the focus of attention for this particular reason that you were able to watch it as well. So there are so many questions I would want to bring into your notice that you need to consider, and you need to compose your reflections on them. So, could Pygmalion be set in the modern day, in today's world, at a time when there are generally more options and opportunities for women? If you think yes, then why? If you think no, again why? We never see any complete families in Pygmalion. We see Eliza's father, but her stepmother is only mentioned in passing. Mrs. Higgins plays a large role, but her husband is never mentioned. The same goes for the Ansford Hill family. What's Shaw trying to tell us here? Why these broken families? Why aren't they complete? What can be a reason? Now think and go back into the reasons behind the change of themes in modern drama and relate this question there. Does Alfred Doolittle's theory about the undeserving poor have any merit? Is he just a good speaker, or is he simply addressing a problem that most people ignore? Well, could Pygmalion take place in a different country, a country with a different language, or is it a play specifically about England and English? I would ask you, can Pygmalion be about Urdu in Pakistan? Can Pygmalion be about a girl in KPK? Can Pygmalion be about a girl who speaks Punjabi in Lahore? I would want you to set this story into local settings and see how do you understand that. Why does Shaw end the play when he does? Is there any reason why Higgins and his mother are the only two people left on stage? Well, Mrs. Higgins mentions that her son only falls in love with older women. Henry herself claims that it's just a matter of habit, that he just can't be bothered with young women. Is Higgins simply too involved with himself and his work like Narcissus? Or is there some deeper reason for his disinterest in women first of all, and then in young women? What do you think so? Early on in the book, Higgins mentioned that English is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible. While he's right with the first two, the Bible definitely wasn't first written in English. What does this say about Higgins? Why would he say that? What does it tell about Higgins? Higgins never gives us his definition of the soul, but he surely loves to talk about it all the time. Does he really even know what he's talking about? And if you think he does, can you bring references from the text to substantiate your answer? Higgins claims that he treats everyone equally, that he does not change his behavior under different circumstances. That said, does Higgins himself change over the course of the play? Okay, Shaw originally wanted to include in the play scenes in which Eliza pretends to be a duchess. Instead, we only get to hear Pickering and Higgins discuss them. Does this change the way we think about the bet? Are we more likely to forget about Eliza's amazing feat as Higgins and Pickering do as a result? Well, you have to answer this. It has been said that Pygmalion is not a play but turning a flower girl into a duchess, but one about turning a woman into a human being. Do you agree? Well, it covers a lot more than what we have discussed in today's talk. In fact, if we take all the discussion we have had on this play, this question can put up all these discussion into one under one category. Whether it's a transformation of a flower girl into a woman, lady, or a woman into a human being. When Eliza Doolittle threatens Higgins that she will take his fanatic findings to his rival in order to support herself, art imitates life, and Shaw's literature echoes a significant episode from his own youth. As a boy, Shaw's mother was an accomplished singer who dedicated herself to the perfection of the method. Her teacher George Vandeller's Lee yoga-like approach to voice training. She went so far as to leave her husband to follow her teacher to London. However, upon realizing that Lee was concerned only about his appearance and the status of his street address, she left him and brought up her daughters by setting up shop herself, teaching the methods as if it were her own. Shaw could not have helped but be impressed and influenced by this courageous move on the part of his mother to strike out on her own and to create an independent life for herself. So Eliza's behavior here is a reflection, basically a close resemblance to what Shaw's real mother has had in her past. What kind of feelings do you get out of it? How do we conceive Eliza's transformed nature and her the scenes accordingly in the eyes of the writer Shaw's? Thus, though Pygmalion shows a lot of sympathy for the flower girl who wants a higher station in life, it is even more concerned with the unloved, neglected women who decides to make herself hard once and for all. The play's determination to have Elizas grow into a full human being, groomed human being with her own mind, and also explains why the play makes seemingly inexplicable structural moves, like leaving out the climax and carrying on for a further 2 acts after the climax. In other words, the superficial climax is not the real climax at all, and Shaw's project is deeper than that of the fairy godmother. So this makes it quite different from the plays of typical patterns and structures, plot structures. In the light of this, what is the Pygmalion myth? In what significant ways and with what effect has Shaw transformed that myth in his play? And now 3 very important questions. The great secret, Eliza, is not having bad manners or good manners. or any other sort of manners. It's having equal manners for all human souls. Well, it is no small coincidence that the author of Higgins' Universal Alphabet is the same man to blur social distinctions, thereby suggesting that social standing is a matter of nurture, not nature. Examine carefully Higgins' attitude towards his fellow men. Can this be taken as an admirable brand of socialism? Or does he fail as a compassionate being in his absolutism? Very important question. And the second important question can be, is A Romance in 5 Acts an accurate description of the play Pygmalion? How does the play conform to the traditional form of a romance? What do you think Shaw is trying to achieve in highlighting the concept of the romance in the title? You might want to look closely at the written sequel to the play in which Shaw gives some very strong opinions about romances. And the last very important question, if you were to create a 6th act to Pygmalion, who would Eliza marry? Or does she marry at all? Use the lines and behaviors of the characters throughout the first 5 acts to support the outcomes of your finale. If possible, try to watch the film version of Pygmalion complete. Although I tried to show you the entire play into entire play as movie, however, I might have missed a few scenes and frames here and there due to the time limitation. However, when you would be able to see the entire movie into one go, you'll be able to understand and link up things more clearly. So when you'll be able to give it a single watch, you'll be better able to design your own finale of the play. This was all about today's talk, when we have discussed in detail about Pygmalion, its character, its question, and our good news is that we are not only finishing up with our 4th text of modern drama, that is Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw. We have almost covered all 4 authors that were given in your course outline for the modern drama. And we are now left with our 4 very important lectures. I would like to have a quick review of whatever we have discussed so far in modern drama in last 28 lectures in the coming 4 talks. So your commitment will make it of great use, because if you have been following things so far, these 4 lectures can clear up all the confusions you would have, if you have any. Or if you don't have any confusions, they will work as your refreshers to prepare you for your finals. This was all about today's talk. I will see you in the next lecture, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.